This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter and far more dangerous. Because what you are watching right now is not chaos. It is a system under pressure, revealing how it actually works. When power is challenged, it doesn't disappear. It looks for shortcuts. It looks for silence. It looks for speed. And suddenly, things that were once unthinkable start being spoken out loud. Not acted on yet, just spoken, tested, floated, and the response to those words tells you more than the words themselves. You may think this is another political fight, another Washington meltdown, another news cycle that will burn hot and fade. But this one is different because for the first time in a long time, the resistance is not coming from the outside. It's coming from inside the machine. Stay with me. Because once you see what's really being tested here, you won't be able to unsee it. And what comes next explains why this moment doesn't end when the headlines do. Power in America does not move the way we're taught it does. It doesn't live in speeches. It doesn't live in tweets. And it doesn't live in outrage. Real power lives in permissions, in who gets to act first, who gets to decide what counts as an emergency, who gets to move while everyone else is still arguing about process. That's the system that actually runs things now. Not ideology, not party loyalty. Momentum, when a president can frame something as urgent enough, dangerous enough, immediate enough, the system begins to bend around that claim. Normal rules slow down, oversight lags, Congress reacts instead of leads. And for years, that imbalance has been quietly tolerated because it was easier, because challenging it felt risky, because everyone assumed the guardrails would hold, but guardrails only work if someone uses them. What's different now is not who holds power. It's that the assumptions around restraint are breaking. And once restraint becomes optional, authority starts to concentrate fast. That's when systems don't collapse loudly. They reorganize. And that shift is already underway. This didn't happen overnight. That's the mistake people make when they try to understand moments like this. They look for the snap, the break, the single decision that changed everything. But the most dangerous shifts don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, incrementally, disguised as efficiency. There was a time when extraordinary powers were treated as exactly that, rare, temporary, politically expensive. Now they're procedural. Before invoking them required persuasion. Now it requires phrasing. Before Congress debated first and reacted later, now it's reversed. And each time the system adapts, it remembers the adaptation. What was once controversial becomes familiar. What was once resisted becomes routine. And what was once unthinkable becomes an option. That's the shift that matters here. Not a dramatic takeover, not a declaration, but the normalization of speed over consent. Because once speed becomes the priority, deliberation looks like obstruction. And oversight starts to feel like sabotage. That's when slow systems fail. Not because they're attacked, but because they're outpaced. And the moment that truth lands inside the system, the pressure doesn't ease, it accelerates. Then the system flinched. Not in public outrage, not in protests, in procedure. A vote advance that almost never does. A restraint buried deep in law, suddenly activated. Not by the opposition, by allies. This was not symbolic. This was structural. Because the authority being challenged wasn't rhetorical power. It was the ability to act militarily without permission, the power to move first and explain later. And the trigger wasn't an order. It was a suggestion, the casual introduction of force as an option against territory that is not disputed. Against a country the United States is bound to defend, that's when the math changed. Because once force is spoken as plausible, the machinery responds. Plans appear, assets shift, timelines compress. Lawmakers understood something most people never see. Intervention doesn't start with deployment. It starts with normalization. So they moved, and the response from the top was not dialogue, It was rage. If this feels abstract, stay with me, because what that reaction exposed matters more than the vote itself, and it points directly to how the next move gets made. Here's the part that rarely gets explained. Emergency power is not about emergencies. It's about bypass. When an emergency is declared, the system doesn't ask whether the threat is real. It asks whether the declaration is valid. And once it is, authority condenses. Funds can be redirected. Rules can be suspended. Timelines disappear. Oversight doesn't stop. It just arrives late. That delay is the mechanism, because in politics, delay is not neutral. Delay favors whoever is already moving. Who benefits from this? Large institutions, entities with lawyers, organizations built to operate inside uncertainty. Who absorbs the cost? Everyone else. Communities that live with the consequences. Workers whose stability depends on predictability. Citizens whose representatives no longer control the purse. That's why emergency language appears at moments of resistance, not coincidence. Design, it reframes pushback as danger. It recasts oversight as risk, and it pressures institutions to fall in line for the sake of speed. Once that logic takes hold, power doesn't need to argue anymore. It just declares, and the system adjusts around it, which is why what happens next isn't slower. It's faster. Then the pressure spiked. Multiple fronts. At the same time, restraint on war powers, emergency declarations expanding authority, oversight requests quietly filing paperwork, none of it dramatic on its own. Together, destabilizing, because systems aren't designed to absorb contradiction. They're designed to resolve it, and resolution in moments like this usually favors the fastest actor. Questions start forming, not accusations. Questions. Why timelines slipped? Why documents stalled? Why urgency in language didn't match urgency in delivery? Those questions don't shout. They accumulate, and accumulation is dangerous. Because answers create records. Records create accountability. Accountability slows momentum. So momentum responds with escalation. With volume, with crisis framing, security, threats, emergencies. Anything that widens the frame fast enough to outrun scrutiny, this is the moment most people miss. Not collapse, not confrontation, compression. Everything speeding up at once. And when systems compress, something always gives. The only question is where. Here's where this stops being theoretical. Because when authority concentrates, you feel it. Not as a headline, as uncertainty. Rules that used to be stable start shifting. Decisions that used to take months happen overnight. And you're told it's necessary, urgent, temporary. But temporary has a way of sticking. When military options expand, it's not abstractions that move. It's people. Deployments extend. Families wait longer. Communities absorb absence. When emergency powers redirect resources, it's not theory that loses. It's priorities. Your representatives have less say. Your voice travels further to be heard. And when transparency slows, you're not just missing information, you're losing the ability to verify reality. That erosion is subtle, and once it's normalized, it's hard to reverse. If this feels uncomfortable, it should. Stay engaged. Stay curious. Because the next phase doesn't stay domestic. And what's unfolding now doesn't stop at borders. Power doesn't exist in isolation. Every move made inside one system sends signals outward, especially when that system sits at the center of global order. Allies watch language as closely as actions. Markets read tone as policy. Governments recalibrate based on precedent, not intention. When military force is spoken as flexible, alliances tighten nervously. When treaties sound optional, trust thins. When emergencies multiply, Stability looks conditional. None of this triggers collapse. It triggers hedging. Countries diversify partnerships. Supply chains reroute. Defense postures shift quietly. The world doesn't panic. It prepares, and preparation has costs. Volatility rises. Coordination slows. Misunderstanding becomes more likely because when signals blur, reaction time matters more than accuracy. This is how localized decisions become systemic risk. Not through domination, through doubt. And once doubt spreads, it doesn't respect borders. The system is still holding, but it's holding differently now. And what happens next determines whether it adapts or fractures. From here, the system doesn't pause. It chooses not deliberately. Structurally, there are three paths visible now. The first is adjustment. Institutions push back just enough to rebalance. Oversight becomes routine again. Extraordinary powers remain available, but costly to invoke. Nothing dramatic changes, but momentum slows. This path requires discipline and memory. The second path is erosion. Pushback fades. Pressure works. The system adapts around speed and loyalty. Emergencies become easier to declare. Limits become suggestions. Precedent piles up quietly. This path feels stable until it isn't. The third path is rupture, not collapse. Breakage, a moment where competing authorities move at once, where law and action diverge, where legitimacy fractures. This path doesn't announce itself ahead of time. It's usually recognized after. What matters is that none of these paths depend on one person. They depend on what gets normalized now. And normalization is happening in real time. The choice isn't theoretical anymore. It's procedural. And it's unfolding whether anyone agrees on it or not. This doesn't end with a verdict. There's no moment where a gavel drops and the system resets. That's not how this works. What happens next is quieter. Votes that seem procedural. Declarations that sound technical. Delays that feel administrative. Each one nudges the boundary. And once a boundary moves without resistance, it remembers that it can. That's the danger. Not collapse. Continuation. A system that still functions, but with less friction, less debate, less consent. You won't be told when that shift becomes permanent. There won't be an alert. It will feel normal until it doesn't. So the question isn't whether this moment matters. It's whether it's noticed long enough to matter. If you want to understand how this evolves, not just what happens, but why, stay with this story. Watch the procedural moves, not the spectacle. Because the next test won't look like the last one. And when it arrives, the system will already be shaped by what we allowed to pass. That's where this goes next. And that's what we'll be watching. Stay with me.